if you want to support here on YouTube, that's another way to do it, and we greatly appreciate that for sure. It's just Patreon is definitely the best way to support the show. People ask that all the time, hey, what can we do? And that's the way we roll. So let's hit these questions in the Patreon group. It's another perk to being in there is you can ask questions for the show, same as super chats here. And we try to get the regular chats in the live stream as well. Sometimes, obviously, you guys know it either goes off the rails or we get too far off topic. We don't get a chance to hit them. But here's what Todd Larson asked. I'm wondering if maybe we have a little bit of a problem with our mock drafts, considering the last few days of Goody. Last few drafts of Goody. He seems to group together several picks for what the room he is trying to upgrade. Think about it. 3 safeties, 2 tight ends, a crap load of receivers. This draft is defensive tackle. So I believe he will rebuild the room with a 330-pound and a true three-tech defensive tackle. So he's thinking more along the lines of, let's go get a 1-tech and a 3-tech. I like it. And I wouldn't be surprised if he took a third defensive tackle, I think is what he was saying there, late round. So I believe we trade back first round, get someone like Grant or Tyleek, then come back and get a player like TJ Sanders. If the trade back works right, we may pick up a wide receiver between these 2 defenders, then fill positions of need from there. Just a thought, what do you think? I think it's a great game plan, Todd. I think it's well thought out. Now, the only thing that I see in that idea there that might be I would push back a little bit is the reason we took so many safeties because there was no one left in the safety room, if you'll remember, right? We cleaned house. And that's why I always kind of gave Joe Barry a little bit of a pass. Like, we pretend like Jeff Hafley just come in here and completely turn this defense around. Boy, we got rid of our starting Mike and Devondre Campbell. We got rid of both of our safeties, our starting safeties, which was Jonathan Owens and Darnell Savage, right? So we kind of scrapped that whole room, and that creates more voids. Now, when you look at defensive tackle this year, we lost TJ Slayton, so there's one void, right? And then you got to look at Kobe Wooden, in my opinion. And nothing personal toward Kobe Wooden. I just think he's the guy, if we're going to let one go, that's probably him. Or if you're going to push a guy down and maybe try to slide him onto the practice squad, it's probably him. He just, 50 PFF grade. He kind of hasn't lived up to the expectations. He's also been kind of banged up. So it would take him moving off the roster to justify taking 2 defensive tackles. So you got to kind of model your roster out and look at it and go, okay, how many spots are actually there to fill, if that makes sense. So I would be totally on board with him taking 2. And again, nothing personal toward Kobe Wooden. He could play football around me in his sleep, right? But I do think we can do better than that, at least what we've seen up to this point. And who knows, maybe you go 1 defensive tackle and Kobe Wooden comes out this year, all extra motivated and just plays like gangbusters. That would be absolutely awesome too. So great comment, great question there, Todd. Appreciate you. Andy Monday, Clayton and the boys. He says, do you think that over the years a front 7 defender's power rush or speed rush stays intact longer? Because of inevitable injuries, it's the power rush usually, right? Perhaps that's Goody's thinking when choosing between an edge with speed and an edge with power. I think you're spot on, Andy. And I'll tell you, when you get asked questions like this, I try to remove my personal opinion because I'm a dumb redneck from Tennessee that don't know anything. I try to look at what people that I respect in the industry think about that. And you guys know I've been very, very vocal. Greg Cosell is at the top of the list for me in terms of guys and gals that scout out football players and understand what pro football teams are looking for. And he always says you've got to have a power element to your pass rush. You've got to. Each player. That's the only knock on James Pierce Jr. You go, okay, he's a little undersized, but he's got great reach. And that's huge in rushing the passer. But he's not a power rusher. He's a speed rusher. And I like what Andy's saying here because that's the first thing that's going to go as you get older is your speed. And people say, well, you're going to get weaker too. Probably, but not quicker than the speed goes, right? And on top of that, if you learn how to still rush with power using your hands, whether it's a punch, pull, and swim, whether it's a dip and rip, all of those things that you could even incorporate power into, because if you set it up with that straight arm rush or just a straight bull rush, those type of things, the swat and swim where you're just literally smacking somebody to the side and swimming over top of them. If you can set those things up, then you can learn to use your hands. Now you've got a counter move to your counter moves to your counter move, right? Those things are absolutely huge. But yeah, to me, this is something I've been very inaccurate on in the past as just a football fan. I didn't realize how important the power rush was. And that's why I'm so high on Walter Nolan when other people aren't. People will look at other pass rushers and go, well, I like him better. I like that one better. He's more of an athletic freak. That may be the case. But Walter Nolan, Greg Cosell's words, not mine, and several other people, Adam Kaplan and other people that covered the draft, said Walter Nolan is this year's Jalen Carter. Now, he might not be quite as good, but the way he rushes the passer, Greg Cosell said it best. He said, as I'm watching Walter Nolan's tape from 23 and 24, and I just see him absolutely dominate great SEC offensive linemen, just driving them into the backfield. He said, I think of Jalen Carter every time. And I remember Jalen Carter being extremely high on our board when he came out. And why was he so high? Because Greg Cosell said, Greg Cosell said the year before Jalen Carter came out of college into the draft, he said Jalen Carter was the best interior defensive lineman he would have been the best in the draft. And then he goes back to college another year and comes out and he's the best defensive tackle. Now, there were some personal issues there, right, that obviously have not translated over to the NFL. He seems to have stayed in line, and many people said if they could put him with his teammate there, Jordan Davis, and other Georgia Bulldogs, maybe they can hold each other accountable in Philly. It worked out. And that's the other thing. Like when you do mock drafts, I'm just kind of thinking out loud now. Andy, it's a great question and a great comment there, Andy, because it does kind of trigger a bunch of thoughts. How many times have you done a mock draft? People, well, we're good at that position. We need this position, right? You'll see them all over Twitter saying that. I wonder how many Philadelphia Eagle fans were saying that when they took Jordan Davis, and then the next year they took Jalen Carter. And then I think they went interior defensive line again last year, right? When you do that, it allows you to just let Milton Williams walk, and now you're capitalizing on a much cheaper rookie contract with a defensive lineman, right? Or, if they're on that same rookie contract, and then when you get the extension, the first year of that cap in on the new extensions, almost pennies on the dollars compared to what it's going to blimp up to. So, you can't get caught up in the whole, well, we're good at that position, or we already drafted that position last year, right? The goal is, what are the most important positions and how do we fill those and keep that rotation going? And also what we led the show with, you're going to miss on picks. Everybody misses on picks. So keep swinging on those important positions so let's say you hit on 1 out of 3, right? That's why I'm not ruling out edge defender. If we have time tonight, we're going to talk edge defender. That's kind of how I see that. And again, I'm sure there were Eagle fans going, I can't believe we took another defensive tackle. They won the Super Bowl. Worked out, right? So build the trenches. Build the trenches. As Emilio says, build the wall, which is ironic because he's the interim Mexican on the show here. He cracks me up. So Andy Monday says, you recently talked about Jack Sawyer and how having Tyleik Williams on the D-line probably inflated Sawyer's performance. Remember Miles Jack coming into the draft? I watched film on him shooting gaps and making stops, but I noticed who was eating blocks to help to make that happen for Jack, Kenny Clark. Go back and watch it if you have the time. That's interesting, man. I don't know enough about that situation. If we get a chance, we'll go check it out. I didn't realize that Kenny Clark and Miles Jack played together, but I'm telling you, that's a real thing. Just like it's a real thing when you've got, 2 different pass rushers, whether it's 2 D tackles or 2 edge defenders. And I can't remember if Miles Jack probably played a hybrid type backer, I would imagine, especially with his athletic prowess. It's kind of like with Notre Dame. I'm a big Notre Dame fan, and they've got a position called Viper, where it's a pass rushing outside linebacker. It's almost like they like to play a lot of 4-3 under, 4-3 over. It's a multiple style defense essentially, and you got a guy that can rush the passer but also drop, and they're constantly rotating guys in and out of that position. But if you get to the point where you've got 2 pass rushers that are effective on a defensive line, now you've got to decide which one made the other look better, right? A good example was last year's draft. I believe it was last year's. Byron Murphy. You guys remember we had Byron Murphy really high. We had T'Vondre Sweat really high. And we kept saying, yeah, but which one's better? Is the better one making the other one look, a little more talented than they actually are? And, if I had to pick between the two, this is me personally, I liked T'Vondre Sweat, but I would have picked Byron Murphy. Byron Murphy didn't do anything this year. T'Vondre Sweat lit it up, according to PFF. And on top of that, T'Vondre Sweat's RAS was a 3. Now, immediately you'll get the Packer draft nicks that say, well, we'd never take them. You can't take them. The RAS is too low. I can't remember who drafted T'Vondre Sweat, but I bet you they're damn glad they did. And that RAS is important, don't get me wrong, but it ain't everything. At the end of the day, man, the goal is to see ball, get ball, and if someone else has the ball, hurt that man who has that ball, right? And keep the ball away from that bad man. So I think it's important to kind of put everything into perspective. And that's why when we do our draft board, the way we do it is so you've got this visualization of everything across the board and you can compare apples to apples with everybody. Like, we'll go ahead and drop this down. Thanks to everybody with the Patreon questions. Definitely appreciate it. That's one of my favorite things about the Patreon group. So just another perk of being in there and supporting the show. If I pull up our draft board here real quick, I think I've got the right one here. Let me make sure. Yeah. So if I pull this up real quick, and hopefully y'all can see this okay. Let me try to get it a little bit, there we go, a little larger for you. So if you look at our board, and I was doing just a little bit of research earlier with the top 30 visit that or not a top 30 visit, but a recent, I think it was like a Skype interview the Packers did with guys. But if you look at these positions here and all these players, right, and across the board, we've got everything listed out. The PFF 22 position ranking, 23 ranking, 24 ranking, where they were on the PFF big board, where they were on the consensus big board, where Daniel Jeremiah had them. And I always, like, we just put in a ton of Kyle Krabs from the 33rd team. We just put in a ton, I think like 100 more grades in. So the board has just grown and maneuvered and switched and flipped and flopped. But I always keep in the earliest grades because that's the most important to me. As the draft grows near, people change their mind. They like this. I want to know your earliest prediction because I can go get the most recent stuff. I can just go to their website and pull it up. I want to know what people thought about prospects as soon as the season wrapped up because that's what's fresh on your mind is the tape. What's fresh on your mind is who was successful. What's fresh on your mind is how did they contribute to their college program as opposed to, I tell you, man, that 40-yard dash was pretty impressive. Let's bump him up 40 spots. You understand what I'm saying? So, like, that stuff is way more important. I will always lean on the tape and what they did on the field as opposed to the underwear Olympics. Now, that's what's so appealing to me with James Pierce Jr. is James Pierce Jr. was always ranked high before he ran the 4.47 40 at the combine. So it's like there was always production there. Doesn't mean he's the perfect fit. Again, he doesn't rush with power, so that worries you. But across the board, you can compare all these. Like if we go down right here, let's say with Tet McMillan, over here on the right, and you can't see it because of our QR code there, but that's Greg Cosell. Gave him a 5-point bonus. Greg Cosell absolutely loved him, right? Well, Mason Graham, he wasn't like overall impressed with Mason. He's not saying Mason Graham isn't worthy of the 4th overall pick. He was just like, yeah, what you see is what you get there. We know how good he is. So I'm not going to give him a huge bonus, right? But Tet McMillan, he loved Tet McMillan. Another one he really liked was Cam Ward. He was on Cam Ward at the end of the college football season, really going in off of Cam Ward's tape from last year. Greg Cosell was like, this dude has elite level traits. So that stuff you can compare apples to apples across the board. Now you see the RASs. If they get that 5-point bonus, that means it's a 9+ RAS, right? 3 is an 8+. 1 is a 7+. A 6 means they got a perfect 10 or a 999. We just rounded it up. So when you begin to look at prospects across the board, the more boxes you have filled up, they should really pique your interest. And it just so happens one of those top 30 visits is Shamar Stewart out of Texas A&M. And look, he's got the Senior Bowl bonus as well, right? That means that I think it was Daniel Jeremiah we used for that. He picked his standouts all week long, the guys who really popped off the tape when it came to the practice footage as well as the game itself. So we gave him a 5-point bonus with the Senior Bowl. That typically translates. Another one was Mike Green, right? Edge defender. Another one, Walter Nolan. So when you get these players that have this stuff all the way across the board, like Shamar Stewart got the Senior Bowl bonus. RAS, he got the maximum bonus. Greg Cosell gave him a 1-point bonus. He locked him, but he's like, he needs to learn how to rush the passer. Like he's just an athletic freak. He just needs to learn how to rush the passer. Now, if you go down to my boy Walter Nolan here, why did I like him so much? Senior Bowl bonus. Greg Cosell said he's the best defensive tackle in this entire draft. Yes, that means better than Mason Graham as well, who's in the 4th spot. And you hear that, and you probably think, well, Clayton, why don't you put him above him on your board? That's not how our board operates. You put all the data in, you remove your personal bias, and where the players fall, they fall. That's kind of how we like to do it. So I'm really happy with the way it's come together this year. And Emilio has been so helpful in bouncing ideas off of Tim and Jacob as well. Emilio has just worked his ass off on this board, and it's really, really come together. So anyway, I just wanted to explain that because that's kind of how I look at that. And you can compare these guys across the board. Like if it's Shamar Stewart on the board and it's James Pierce Jr. and you look at him, okay, James Pierce Jr. is 1 tier higher than Shamar Stewart. So that would say, okay, you should probably take him. Not necessarily. He doesn't meet the athletic threshold for the Packers. Shamar Stewart does. Okay, well, that's one notch for Shamar Stewart. He didn't perform in the East-West Shrine Bowl or the Senior Bowl. James Pierce Jr. didn't. Shamar Stewart did, and he stood out, right? RAS, James Pierce Jr. got a 9+, but Shamar Stewart had a better RAS. James Pierce Jr. did not get a Greg Cosell bonus, but Shamar Stewart did. That's where you kind of look at it and go, damn, maybe we like Shamar Stewart a little bit better. When you get in those clusters where they're close, you got to make that decision of what's most important to you. So anyway, it's just a little glance into the draft board. And again, you guys have access to that over at the PFF. At the Patreon group, just patreon.com/Packer Fan Total Access. Go to the chats. You'll see there's just a designated locked chat that's always going to have an updated link. And I got to get the new one out tonight because, like I said, the board shuffled big time today. So, all right, let's get into the first topic here.